Question number 3. What does retrograde mean? How do we know when a planet is retrograde? Okay, good. So this is the planets and grahas section, which is appropriate to talk about this. Retrograde means that from our point of view on Earth, it looks like the planet is going backwards in the sky. So if we were observing in the night sky, Jupiter moving from Libra to Scorpio, we'd see that direct motion. Well, there will come a point in time in relationship to how the Earth is situated to the sun and the planet that it'll seem from our perspective that Jupiter is moving backwards from Scorpio to Libra. And that's when we get the idea of retrograde. It's moving backwards. It's going retro. We can tell that it's retrograde. In the sky, oftentimes a retrograde planet, if we can observe and see it moving backwards, well, that's how we can tell. Oftentimes retrograde planets are brighter than usual because they're closer to the Earth during the time of retrograde motion. But the way we tell it in our software, at least the way that we can tell it in Kala, is we'll see a little R by the planets. We'll see the symbol for Jupiter and then an R, which means retrograde. So what does it mean? Well, retrograde is bringing the planet closer to the Earth. It's also making the planet brighter, which makes it more intense in our awareness. And there's a couple different things that go on with retrograde. Number one, the karaka indications of retrograde motion planet become more pronounced within our life. So if we have Mercury retrograde, for example, what happens when Mercury goes retrograde? Well, people make up all these stories, like all of a sudden your computer shuts down, no one can communicate clearly and all that. That's not necessarily true unless there happens to be a deficiency in your chart of Mercury, which would cause that to be the case. So when we think of a planet getting closer to us and becoming brighter, that means it becomes more fully in our awareness. So in the case, in the situation of Mercury retrograde, well, what's happening when Mercury becomes more fully in our awareness? We don't just become more aware of the positive sides of Mercury, because there is a positive side to Mercury retrograde. We also become aware of the negative aspects of Mercury, those things that we are deficient in or have difficulties with. And why might that be the case? Because it's bringing it into our awareness so that we can experience a stronger aspect or consciousness of that Mercury. And that's the way it works with all of these planets. When we think about Saturn and so on, when we go through a Saturn return, when Saturn goes retrograde, when we're going through a Saturn dasha, what's happening? Well, we're becoming more aware of that planet, which means that if there are problems with that planet, we are also going to become more aware of those problems of that planet. So essentially, a retrograde planet becomes more fully in our awareness. If you have a wonderful Mercury, if you have a wonderful Jupiter, a wonderful Saturn, you already know how to work with those planets. You already know where your weaknesses are and how to deal with those. If you already know how to tap into the positive, when a planet goes retrograde, that can be a wonderful time to benefit more from that planet's natural function. But the problem is that most people have severe deficiencies in certain planets, which is okay. Most of us have that. And when a planet goes retrograde, we end up paying a little too much attention to, oh my goodness, everything's going wrong, rather than, this is what's going wrong, so therefore I need to address it. So we could spend a long time on retrograde, but the main idea with retrograde is that it becomes more fully in your awareness. The karaka indications of Mercury become more obvious to you. And that's, in a sense, how retrograde planets function. I had one person recently write to me, well, at least he commented on my YouTube channel, and I think I was talking about giving advice or information to people, and it was dealing with probably Saturn and Sun conjunction. And he was saying that, what the astrologer needs to do is share only the positive with their clients, because that will inspire the client to do their best and accomplish their goals better. So he was taking this real positive view on client student interaction, or not client student interaction, client astrologer interaction. And while I think there is some merit to that to a degree, if you really think about it, if everyone has the capacity to be intelligent and to think logically and to make good decisions, does it really help the masses to say, you've got that potential, and so good for you? Or is it more helpful to say, yeah, we've got that potential, but here's where you're deficient and here's where you need to work on so that you can actually have that potential? So most people don't like to hear those sorts of things. And that's, again, why I think this particular individual is saying that. But all this can tie into retrograde because, again, retrograde can have a tendency to point out more of the problems with the planet. And ideally, that's so that you can work on and develop the planet, brings more conscious awareness to the planet. In Junko, we have a comment there. You've noticed that the retrograde planets usually have low kashta. Well, that's true, because one of the calculations that go into Ishta and Kashta deal with whether a planet is retrograde or how close it is to exaltation. So that's why the theory or the idea comes around that a retrograde planet that is debilitated acts like it's exalted, that's the main one. And that's because when you have a debilitated planet, it's going to have a low Ishta score generally and a high Kashta, because that's how the calculation works. But when you get a planet that is retrograde and debilitated, well, the fact that it's retrograde, the planet is slowing down, it's going in the reverse direction, it adds more Ishta, more beneficial influence to the planet. So that's why if we have 60 points of beneficial influence, that's what we're aiming for, the maximum of 60 points. Maximum of 60 points. And you get a planet debilitated, well, that's going to take the planet essentially, if it's just debilitation, down to, let's say, 0 out of 60. But then if you take the planet and you make it retrograde, and it's an extremely slow point in its cycle, well, that's going to add 30 more points. So that's going to make the planet act like it's got 30 out of 60 points, which is 50%, which is average. So to a lot of people, that's going to seem like a debilitated planet is really giving good results there. And again, compared to 0 to 30, that can seem like a reverse debilitation. But this is the reasoning, the idea behind why people say a debilitated planet retrograde acts like it's exalted. But really, if you get an exalted planet and it's retrograde, well, that is an extremely powerful planet. That's going to be 60 out of 60 points. It's about as good as you're going to get. So retrograde does add a lot of positivity if the planet is already doing extremely well. So hopefully this speaks to the idea of retrograde planets. All right, so let's see. Again, I want to keep going through these email questions before I hop on over to the group chat here. So next question.